All right, let's get into it. We are talking about one of the most game-changing stories in all of comic book history. It's a story that took a pretty classic monster, put him on the operating table, and performed what you could only call a philosophical autopsy. And in doing so, it didn't just change the character, it changed what comics themselves could be.
I mean, really think about that. This is the question that takes this whole thing from a simple monster story and turns it into a philosophical masterpiece. It's a question that shifts the focus from the horror of a body changing to the absolute terror of a mind just dissolving. It asks, what's even left of you when your very identity is ripped away?
So to really get a grip on how huge this change was, we have to look back at what came before. Who was Swamp Thing before this whole thing got turned on its head? Okay, so the original Swamp Thing, created way back in 1971, was a classic tragic hero. The setup was simple but really effective. A scientist, Alec Holland, is working on this secret formula, a bomb goes off, he gets drenched in the stuff and stumbles into the swamp. He comes out as this grotesque, plant-based creature. He was a man trapped in a monster's body, cut off from everything he knew. A perfect example of classic body horror.
But then, in 1984, a new writer comes on board, a guy named Alan Moore, and he decides to perform his own kind of autopsy, not on the creature's body, but on the very idea of the character.
What's so brilliant about Moore's approach is he doesn't just show up and ignore everything. Nope, he carefully takes it all apart. His very first issue is literally called Loose Ends, and in it, he ties up all the old plot lines and then ends it by having the hero get shot to pieces and apparently killed. This wasn't just a cheap cliffhanger. This was him clearing the board.
And that brings us to the next issue, the anatomy lesson. This is it. This is where everything changes. The whole story is framed not like a superhero comic, but like a cold, scientific report on the hero's dead body.
So the government brings in this minor villain, Jason Woodrue. He's this brilliant but pretty twisted scientist who's part plant himself, and they tell him, figure this thing out, dissect the corpse. And as Woodrue starts his work, he starts asking these very logical, very simple questions that somehow no one had ever thought to ask before.
Right away, the cracks start to show. The whole original idea, once you actually put it under a microscope, it just starts falling apart. I mean, Alec Holland's formula was made for plants. How on earth could it completely rewrite the DNA and biology of a complex animal like a human?
Scientifically, it's nonsense. Woodrue's cutting into the body and finding what look like organs, a heart, lungs, but they're not real. They're just plants, shaped like organs. They couldn't possibly function. This thing wasn't breathing air or pumping blood. The whole transformation just doesn't add up, and Woodrue gets totally obsessed with this puzzle.
So he spends weeks locked away with this corpse, and he finally puts it all together. He reaches a conclusion that is, well, it's scientifically elegant, but it is existentially terrifying.
And here it is, the big one. Alec Holland never survived the explosion. He died that night. The formula, that bio-restorative gunk, it just absorbed his memories, his consciousness from his dying body. The creature we call Swamp Thing was never a man. It was just a bunch of swamp plants that had absorbed a human's mind and built a body in his image, dreaming it was him.
And just like that, with that single revelation, the entire feel of the story changes. It makes this incredible leap from one kind of horror to another, something way deeper and, honestly, much scarier.
The horror isn't about a man losing his body anymore. Now, it's about a being who finds out it never even had a human soul to start with. The fear isn't physical, it's metaphysical. It's not I'm a person trapped in a monster, it's the horrifying thought that I was never a person to begin with.
So this is where we started, right? Body horror. That deep, gut-level fear of your own body turning against you, of being trapped inside this decaying, twisted thing while your mind, the real you, is still in there watching it all happen.
But this is the new reality, existential horror. It's a fear that lives in your mind. It makes you question what a soul is, what consciousness really is, and what it even means to be you in this huge, weird, and maybe meaningless universe.
So, where does that leave our hero? Well, learning this truth throws Swamp Thing into a total existential crisis. He's not a man, he's a copy, he's an echo, a ghost. So, what is he?
This whole situation leads us right to a core idea of existentialism, which the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre famously talked about. The idea that existence precedes essence basically means we're not born with a set purpose or a defined personality. We just exist first, and then it's up to us to create our own meaning, our own essence, through the choices we make.
And that is exactly the journey Swamp Thing goes on. First, the crisis, learning his whole life was a lie. This literally shatters his mind, and his body just dissolves back into plain old unthinking plants. But then, the woman he loves, Abigail Arcane, is in danger, and that forces him to pull himself back together. He realizes, hey, if I'm not Alec Holland, then I don't have to be. He can choose who he is, and he builds a new self right there, from nothing.
So now he's free from the limitations of thinking he's a man who lost his body, and he has this much bigger understanding of the world. He goes to confront Woodrue, who wants to wipe out all animal life. But Swamp Thing doesn't throw a punch. He uses pure logic. He just calmly explains that if animals are gone, there's no more carbon dioxide, and without that, all plants will eventually die too. He completely dismantles his enemy's entire worldview in about a minute. Thread over.
And this brings us to the really powerful takeaway from this whole story. That horrifying truth, it didn't destroy him. In this really strange way, it actually set him free.
So instead of being this tragedy, the truth becomes liberating. He accepts that the whole Alec Holland identity was a lie, a ghost he was clinging to. And by letting that go, he's finally free to just be himself, whatever that's going to mean. He finds joy not in who he thought he was, but in the amazing potential of who he could become.
And that's really the amazing message at the heart of this. Facing up to the fact that the stories we tell ourselves about who we are might not be true, yeah, it's painful, for sure. But it's also the only way we can ever really, truly grow. By shedding that lie, Swamp Thing didn't just find peace. He found a power and a connection to the world that he never could have dreamed of when he was just a man.
So it leaves us with this final thought to chew on. The identities we hold on to so tightly, the past we think defines every part of us. What if those things aren't protecting us? What if they're actually limiting us? What if the most terrifying truth about yourself is also the one thing that can truly set you free?